The death certificate slid across the counter and stopped at her fingertips, and the fluorescent light above her hummed like a trapped bee. Naya stared at the line that said cause of death, and her breath broke into a sound that was not a scream, and not a whisper, but something raw that made the clerk look away. She did not feel the chair under her. She did not feel the cold tile. She only felt the weight of a day that had no shape. And she said, "I want to see her one more time, please. Just one more time." And the clerk shook his head and pointed to a door marked restricted, while security shifted their feet and glanced at each other as if grief were troubled. That might Billionaire pushed the photo frame closer to the glass, the one with her mother laughing in a yellow dress, the one with the corner cracked where it had fallen during the first ambulance call. And she said, "We have no money for the private room. But love is not a room you pay for. Let me in, let me in, please." A woman in scrubs softened and reached for a form. Then a man with a lanyard slid between them and said, "Rules are rules," and the words bounced off the glass like moths. And Naya felt something inside her tilt, something that had stayed upright through rent notices and side jobs and whispers on the bus. Now it leaned, and then it fell. She walked out into the rain that had started and stopped and started again. A stubborn rain that wanted to wash the whole street clean and then changed its mind. And outside the emergency room doors, she looked up at the gray sky and yelled, the way you yell when no one is listening and also when everyone is listening. A sound that pulled eyes from phones and made a toddler go quiet in a stroller. People turned. A driver cut the engine of a black car and lowered the window a fraction. A camera phone rose from a sleeve. The rain made stars on Naya's cheeks and her voice kept going. Not words at first, only ache, only sound. And then the words came like stones thrown into a dark river. "My mom died today," she said, "and she had a name and a smile and a laugh that fixed bad days. She taught me how to braid hair and count change and stand up straight when someone talks down. And now you tell me I cannot touch her hand. You tell me to sign here and go home. And what home is that now?" The automatic doors sighed, but did not open for her, and she pressed her palm to the glass so hard her lifeline went white. And the security guard said, "Miss, please step back." And a nurse at the end of the hallway bit her lip and blinked fast. And somewhere a printer kept spitting pages like a small bored animal across the drop lane. The black car idled like a patient animal, low and expensive, with a driver who looked at the world as if it were breakable. And in the back seat, a man leaned forward into the glow of his phone, the light painting his sharp cheekbones and the careful lines around his mouth, the kind of face that sat in magazines beside words like influence and empire. He heard the voice before he saw the girl, and he could not place why the sound went straight through his suit and into the part of him that kept a room locked and windowless, a room he rarely opened, the room that smelled of bleach and old rain and the burning sugar of hospital coffee. From years he had promised to forget. The driver spoke softly and said, "Traffic behind us, sir." And the man held up a hand, and the car stayed where it was. And the driver sat back, because when Darius Cole held up a hand, people usually stopped moving, and also because he had never heard his employer breathe like that, as if he had been running near. Dropped to her knees on the wet concrete, the photo of her mother pressed to her chest, and the rain pushed her hair against her forehead, and she looked small and fierce at the same time, like someone who had been thrown from a great height and was already trying to stand. A woman in a red coat crouched and tried to help her up, offering a napkin that turned to pulp in the rain. A teen offered a hoodie. A man muttered about the system and turned his face away because some pain is too bright to look at. And then a hand from the black car door placed a large dark umbrella above Naya, and the world fell into a hush that came from money and gravity and the surprise of it. Olnia glanced up and saw shoes polished like mirrors, the hem of a navy coat cut with the kind of line that means a tailor knows your name, and a face she recognized from billboards where words like future and build appeared. A face that never looked wet or tired, now standing at her side, while rain ticked on the umbrella like a soft drum. He did not speak first. He simply held the umbrella a little lower, so the water slid away from her shoulders. And in that moment the crowd changed shape, as crowds do when power shifts the air. People stepped back but leaned in, phones lowered and then rose. The guard hesitated and then pretended he had a radio call to answer. Naya wiped her face with the back of her hand and forced herself to breathe. That slow count her mother had taught her in the kitchen during late rent months. And she said, "I only want to see her. They will not let me. They say rules," and the last word cracked because rules is something you use to shut a door you do not want to open. Darius looked at the glass and the reflection of themselves in it, the soaked girl and the dry man under a circle of shelter, and for a moment his eyes slid to the photo in her arms and stuck there. A yellow dress, a laugh frozen mid-tilt, a dimple he thought he remembered from a room with harsh light, and a nurse who hummed under her breath. "What is her name?" he asked, and Naya drew herself up because names are a kind of armor and a kind of prayer, and she said, "Her name is Leela Grant. She is mine. She is everything." The name went through Darius like a bell struck in fog, and the past shifted in its chair and sat forward, and the driver looked up in the rear-view mirror with surprise he could not hide, because he had seen that name before on a list that lived in a folder that lived behind a password, that lived in a mind that never forgot. Richest nodded once, an old habit of decision made, then glanced at the guard and the lanyard man, who had appeared as if conjured, and he said, "We are going in," his voice calm as a quiet room with the door closed. And before anyone could put a form between them, he was already moving with Naya at his side, the umbrella tipping and filling and shedding water like a small black boat inside. The air smelled like sanitizer and fear, and Nia felt her legs shake as the fluorescent lights ran in lines toward a far wall that never seemed to arrive, and the clerk behind the glass began to speak in the tone of a person reciting a rule to protect their job, and Darius set down a black card that made the clerk forget his next line. "We are not buying anything," Nia said under her breath, fierce and shaky, and Darius glanced at her with something like respect and said, "We are buying time and the door that keeps shutting in your face. And sometimes those doors only listen to money, and I am not proud of it, but I will use it for this." Paperwork appeared like mushrooms after rain, signatures bloomed, the restricted sign on the door lost its courage, and the nurse in scrubs who had softened earlier led them down a hallway where the floor squeaked and the walls listened, and Naya wiped her cheeks again and tried to make her breaths match the beep of a distant monitor. When they reached the viewing room, the nurse paused with her hand on the handle and said, "Are you ready?" The words that always feel useless and yet are all anyone can offer, and Naya nodded because there is no such thing as ready, and there is only the next step then. The lanyard man hurried down the hall with a stiff smile and a new form and said, "There is a hold on the body. Release is delayed pending administrative review." He said the words like a script learned during a lunch break. He said them with a look over Darius's shoulder at someone invisible who gave orders, and Nia's hands curled into fists so tight her nails bit her palms. "A hold," Darius repeated, slow as a fuse, and the nurse whispered, "I am sorry," and really meant it. And the lanyard man shuffled his papers as if paperwork were armor, and Darius stepped closer and looked at the header of the new form and went very still, because the letters in the corner were not hospital letters. They belonged to a foundation with a logo he knew better than his own signature. Nia looked from face to face, the nurse kind and helpless, the clerk nervous, the man in the fine coat turned to stone, and she said, "What does it mean? What is happening? Why is there a hold on my mother? Why is a charity name on that paper?" Darius reached for the form, and now his voice had lost its smooth edges. It sounded like gravel under a tire. And he said, "This is not a charity, not really, and not mine alone. And someone is using a name that belongs to me to move your mother's body like a piece on a board. And I need to know why." Nia lifted the photo and held it so the light caught the yellow dress again, and the nurse gasped a little sound she could not swallow because she too recognized something and did not know from where. And Naya said she cleaned the halls in a building uptown once and came home smelling like lemon and rain, but we never asked whose building that was because asking makes trouble behind. The glass, the clerk's phone vibrated like a trapped insect. He read the message and went paler than paper. The lanyard man's smile died on his mouth, and the nurse stepped back like a wave pulling from shore, and Darius turned the form over, and there, on the second page, was a signature that froze the air between them. He raised his eyes to Naya with a look that was not pity and not shock but something heavier, like recognition mixed with a promise he did not yet know how to keep, and he said, "Your mother and I have a history that was meant to stay buried, and someone just dug it up in the worst possible way." Nia's grip tightened on the frame until the cracked corner gave with a soft snap, the sound of one more small thing breaking on a day already full of breaking, and her voice dropped to a rough whisper as she asked, "What history? What did you do with my mother? What did she do for you? Why is your name on the paper that keeps her from me?" Darius did not answer right away. his jaw set as if it were a lock he could not pick. The nurse watched the door, as if expecting someone to walk in with more forms and fewer answers. The hallway seemed to lean closer, and the rain hammered the windows like impatient fists. Finally Darius looked down at the yellow dress in the photo, and then at Nia, and said words that made the nurse reach for the wall, and the clerk forget his script, and the driver outside checked the mirror again, because the timeline of the day had just cracked open. "Your mother saved my life once," he said, "and I may owe her more than my life. And if the people who put this hold in place are the ones I think they are, then your cry did more than reach me today. It woke up a secret that could burn a city, and they will not let you say goodbye without a fight, and I am going to help you. But you need to hear what she asked me to keep hidden all these years. And you need to decide if you still want it opened." Now the corridor seemed to stretch forever, and the air grew thick, as if the hospital itself was holding its breath, and Nia felt her pulse hammering against her throat, while the man beside her stood, so still that he could have been carved out of stone, and she wanted answers, but every word that came out of his mouth only layered more questions on top of the grief she carried like a weight, dragging her to the floor. The nurse shifted uneasily and whispered, "We cannot stay here too long. There will be supervisors coming, and if they see you in this wing without clearance, it will be trouble for all of us." And Darius turned his head slowly and looked at her with the kind of gaze that silences argument, and yet his voice, when he spoke, was calm and low. He said, "She deserves to see her mother one last time, and no system, no form, no signature should keep that from her." Nia clenched the photograph against her chest and said, "I do not understand why you keep saying your name is on those papers. I do not understand why my mother would have anything to do with a man like you." And Darius breathed in, as though gathering dust from old memories he had promised to bury, and then he said, "Leela Grant was more than a mother who cleaned offices and walked home in the rain. She was the one who stepped in front of a bullet meant for me years ago, and I never forgot her face. And now seeing you, I know why the memory has been gnawing at me all this time." The words struck Nia like a second loss, layered over the first. Her knees almost gave out, but she steadied herself against the wall, the paint cool under her palm, and she whispered, "My mother never told me about any of that. She only said, work hard, keep quiet, stay safe, and I did not know she carried a secret like this. Why would she hide it from me? Why would she take that to her?" Darius's jaw flexed, and he said, "Because she did not want the danger that followed me to ever touch you, because the people who sent that bullet were not finished. Because saving me tied her fate to mine, and perhaps she believed silence was the only shield she could give you, but silence cannot last forever, and today it has broken." The nurse glanced over her shoulder again and murmured, "Please, if you are going to talk about things like this, not here. The cameras and the staff, they will notice." And Darius nodded once, then guided Nia toward a small consultation room with blinds half closed, where the hum of the light drowned some of the hallway noise. He motioned her to sit, but she refused, standing stiff as though sitting would be surrender, and he began to speak. In measured tones he told her of a deal gone wrong when he was still clawing his way up from nothing, how rival investors turned violent, how a young cleaning woman had stepped into the wrong place at the wrong time and ended up saving him by pure instinct, how her face in that moment became etched into his life, a debt he never repaid, and one he tried to bury when success swallowed him. Nia felt her chest tighten. She could not reconcile the woman who hummed while cooking beans with the woman he described who stopped a bullet meant for a rising empire. She said, "My mother never wanted riches. She never wanted anything but peace, and you are telling me that peace was broken long before she came home to me." And Darius lowered his eyes for the first time and admitted, "Sometimes peace is the price of survival, and she paid that price for me without even knowing what she stepped into." The driver appeared briefly at the doorway, his face drawn with worry, and he said, "Sir, the calls are coming in from the board. Someone knows you are here, and they are not pleased." And Darius raised a hand in dismissal, but the unease in his eyes betrayed that the message mattered more than he admitted. And Nia caught it. She said, "This is not just about my mother's body, is it? This is bigger than both of us." And his silence was the confirmation she feared. Outside the blinds, the footsteps of administrators grew louder and voices sharper, as if the hospital itself was becoming hostile territory, and the nurse slipped inside with a tremor in her voice, saying, "They are saying an executive order has been placed to move the body tonight under custody. They are saying it is no longer a medical matter, but a legal one, and I do not know what that means, but it feels wrong." Nia felt the floor tilt beneath her. She shouted, "No, they cannot take her. She is mine." She is my mother. You cannot own a body with paper. You cannot steal her from me." And her cry cracked the stale air in the room, her pain spilling through the slats in the blinds, and even the administrator outside paused for a moment before barking another order into a phone. Darius stepped closer, his shadow falling across her, and he said, "Listen to me. You can fight them with tears and they will step over you, or you can fight them with power, and I can give you that, but it will cost you truth and danger, and maybe more than you are ready to carry. Which do you choose?" And his eyes burned with something like challenge, and something like Plenia shook her head fiercely. She said, "I do not want your power. I want my mother, and I want the truth. If she carried this secret for you, then I will carry it now, because I will not let her voice be stolen with her body, and if that means danger, then so be it. I have nothing left to lose." And the words came out stronger than she felt inside, but sometimes strength is born from empty spaces. Darius studied her, and then gave a nod of respect that few people ever earned from him, and he said, "Then the first truth is this: the hold placed on her body is not about her at all. It is about me. Someone wants to send a message. Someone wants to rattle the foundations of what I built, and they are using the memory of the woman who saved me as their weapon, and by extension they are using youth." Nurse gasped softly and said, "That means you need to leave now, before they come here with more than papers." And Darius looked at Naya and said, "Will you come with me? If we walk out now, we may find answers, but we will not be able to come back." And she looked at the closed blinds and thought of the cold steel drawer behind the restricted door, and her mother lying there alone, and she said, "I cannot leave her here, but I cannot lose the chance to know the truth. Either take me with you and then bring me back to Hertha." Hallway erupted with hurried footsteps, and the sound of multiple men in suits approaching, and Darius's driver stepped in quickly, saying, "They are almost here, sir." And Darius placed a steady hand on Nia's shoulder, guiding her to the side. "Exit the nurse, opening doors with her access card, her face pale but determined, and in minutes they were slipping through a service corridor that smelled of bleach and loneliness. They burst into the night air behind the hospital. The rain had slowed to mist, the city lights blurred against the wet pavement, and the black car waited like a sentinel with the engine low and hungry. Nia hesitated on the threshold, clutching the broken frame of her mother's picture, her mind screaming that she was leaving too much behind, and yet her body moving because something bigger was pulling her. Now inside the car, the leather was cold against her skin, and the world outside looked like another planet. She pressed the photo to her chest and whispered, "I will come back for you, Mama. I promise." And Darius heard it, though she did not mean him to, and he looked out the window at the hospital fading behind them, his reflection fractured by raindrops, and he murmured, "She will not be left alone. Not this time, not again." The driver asked where to, and Darius gave an address that made the driver flinch slightly, because it was not one spoken often, and not without risk, and Nia caught that flicker and her suspicion deepened. She said, "Where are we going?" And Darius replied, "To the place where the truth sleeps, under lock and guard. And if we are lucky, it will answer us before the people who fear it arrive." The car surged forward through streets slick with rain and neon glare, and Nia watched the world blur by wondering how grief had turned into this chase, how the loss of one woman had opened the door to a world of secrets and battles, and men who carried power like weapons. She thought of her mother's hands braiding her hair, and wondered if those same hands had once held a life that was far heavier than any child ever. Nudarus broke the silence with a confession. He said, "I have spent years pretending the past could not touch me. I built walls of glass and steel and numbers, but your cry tonight cracked every wall I made, and I cannot look away anymore." And though his voice was steady, his hand flexed once on his knee, like a man bracing for impact. Nia's eyes burned, and she whispered, "Then tell me everything, and do not hold back." And Darius turned his gaze to her, his face sharp in the glow of passing headlights, and said, "Then be ready, because once the door opens, you cannot close it again." The car slipped into a darker district where towers leaned close, and windows watched like eyes, and the driver slowed, as if even the machine beneath him understood they were entering ground where rules bent and shadows ruled. And Nia clutched her photograph and thought of her mother's smile, and whispered again for strength, as the next chapter of her grief twisted into something larger than she could yet name. The car stopped before a gate, rusted but guarded by men who knew more than they admitted, and as they stepped out, the night wind carried the smell of iron and secrets, and Darius said softly, "This is where the answers begin, but it is also where the danger waits." And Nia knew there was no turning back, because her cry had already reached further than she imagined. and the echo was just starting to return. The gate creaked open with a reluctant groan, as though it did not want to let them through, and Naya felt her stomach tighten, because the air on the other side was heavier. It carried the scent of old paper, iron, and something else she could not place, maybe fear, maybe history buried alive. The guards did not question Darius, they only bowed their heads slightly, as if acknowledging someone who belonged to another world entirely, and she followed him, clutching the cracked photograph frame, as if he could keep her grounded. The compound beyond the gate was a forgotten estate, tall stone walls streaked with rain, ivy crawling like veins across their surfaces. Windows shuttered, but faint lights leaking through cracks as though secrets themselves needed lamps to survive, and Naya's shoes crunched gravel loud against the hush of the night. She whispered, "Where are we?" And Darius answered, "A place that was never meant to be seen by the public, a place where records are kept that even governments pretend not to know." The driver remained by the car, his eyes scanning the shadows, but his posture tense, as if even he did not want to step further. Naya saw it and knew this was not a normal errand for him. This was a crossing into a forbidden chapter of his employer's life. She asked again, "Why bring me here? Why not leave me to grieve?" And Darius stopped walking and turned to her, his gaze steady like stone, and said, "Because your grief is now tied to mine, and because the truth they used to put a hold on your mother belongs in this house and nowhere else." They entered through double doors heavy with rusted handles, and the inside smelled of dust, leather, and ink. The floor groaned with each step, and shelves lined the walls from ceiling to floor, books, files, locked boxes, all labeled in codes that meant nothing to Naya but clearly carried weight. Darius moved with the assurance of someone who had walked here before, though each step seemed to drag memories with it. She stayed close because every corner looked capable of swallowing her whole, and old man appeared from between the stacks, his beard long, his eyes cloudy, but sharp enough to notice everything. He looked at Nia first, then at Darius, then at the photograph pressed to Nia's chest, and he said, "The past comes back whether we invite it or not. You should not have brought her here, Darius." And his tone was not unkind, but heavy with warning. Darius replied, "She has a right. She is her mother's daughter." And the old man sighed, as if that truth carried weight. He had always feared that. Old man shuffled toward a locked cabinet, pulled out a ring of keys that jingled softly like distant bells, and opened it. Inside were folders yellowed with time and marked with initials, some of which Naya thought she had seen on tall buildings downtown. He pulled one marked LG and handed it to Darius. Without a word, Naya's breath caught at the sight of those two letters, her mother's life, compressed into paper, sealed by strangers. Darius opened the folder slowly, the way one opens a grave. He spread the contents on a wooden table, the edges curling with age. There were reports, photographs, signatures, lists of names, and one image that froze. Naya, her mother younger, wearing that same yellow dress, smiling at a man whose face was unmistakably Darius. Though younger, harder eyes, sharper jaw. She gasped and whispered, "You knew her that well? You were with her?" Darius' hand hovered above the photograph, and he said, "Yes, but not in the way you fear." She worked in the building where we conducted our most dangerous meetings. She heard things she should not have, and one night when gunfire broke through the walls, she pulled me into cover before the bullets struck. She was more than just a bystander. She became the reason I am alive, and I owed her my future, but I could not repay it without painting a target on her, and so I stayed away. Nia trembled, her fingers brushing the papers that told stories she never heard. Her mother had carried this silence for decades, and now the truth was spilling across a table in a house that reeked of secrets. She said, "But why would they stop me from seeing her body? Why now?" And the old man cleared his throat and said, "Because there are people who never wanted her name tied to that night. They erased her from the record long ago, but someone discovered the truth, and now they fear exposure." Clenched her fists and said, "Then they want to silence even her death. They want to keep me from saying her name aloud." And the old man nodded sadly. "Truth is dangerous, child, especially when it belongs to those who built empires on lies." Darius leaned forward and pointed at a line of the report written in cold ink and said, "This signature here belongs to a man who sits on my board today. He was part of the night your mother saved me, and he never wanted that story told because it would ruin him." The revelation burned through the air. Naya felt rage bubbling under her grief because she could see it clearly now. Her mother's body was not being withheld because of paperwork, but because powerful men were terrified of her memory. She whispered, "They are afraid of a cleaning woman, afraid of the truth she carried." And the old man said, "Not just afraid, they are willing to destroy, to keep it buried." Suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed from the hall. The driver rushed in, breathless, and said, "They found us, we cannot stay." Darius gathered the files swiftly, sliding them into a leather case, and handed it to Nia. He said, "This belongs to you, now it is your mother's story as much as mine. Protect it, even if it burns everything else." And she hugged it to her chest, though her arms shook from the weight of history. The old man pulled the lever, hidden behind a shelf, and a narrow passage revealed itself, lined with stone and smelling of damp earth. He said, "Go quickly, the front gate will not hold them long." Darius gripped the old man's shoulder in thanks, and guided Nia into the passage, the driver taking rear guard. The darkness closed around them, only the sound of dripping water and the echo of their footsteps guiding them deeper. Nia whispered in the dark, her voice raw, "What if they take her body away before we return? What if I never get to say goodbye?" And Darius's voice floated back, steady like a vow, "They will not take her, not while I still breathe, and if they try, we will fight them with every truth they fear." And she clung to that promise, though a part of her still doubted, because promises were fragile against the weight of power. The tunnel ended at a hidden exit behind the estate, leading to a narrow alley where a second car waited. The driver urged them in quickly as headlights cut across the far end of the alley, men in suits closing in with the efficiency of hunters. Nia stumbled into the car, the folder pressed to her chest, Darius sliding in beside her, his jaw tight with fury. The car sped away, shots rang out behind them, bullets sparking against stone, the driver swerving hard to lose pursuit. Nia pressed her face to the seat, trembling. She had never known fear like this, and yet inside her something hardened, a steel born of loss and injustice. She whispered, "Mama, I will not let them erase you. I will not let them steal your story." And her words carried a weight that even Darius noticed. He looked at her as though seeing not a grieving girl, but a fighter forged in fire. The city blurred past, neon lights smearing into streaks, and the folder in Nia's arms seemed to grow heavier each block they passed. She opened it again. Despite the chaos inside, were not just records but letters, handwritten in her mother's script to a man named D, addressed with tenderness and urgency. Her heart pounded, realizing these were letters her mother never meant her to read, words meant for Darius, words that spoke of choices, sacrifices, and warnings. Nia read fragments aloud, her voice breaking. She wrote that she feared the danger never left. She wrote that she prayed you would use the life she saved for good. She wrote that if one day I came crying, you would not turn away. And she looked at Darius with eyes full of both accusation and desperate hope. Darius listened, his jaw clenched, his hand trembling once before he steadied it on his knee. He whispered, "She still believed in me after all I have done and not done, and now her belief rests in you, Nia, not me, and you must decide what to do with it, because the men who fear these words will stop at nothing to destroy them." The car swerved into an underground garage hidden beneath one of Darius's properties, the gate closing behind them, sealing them in relative safety for the moment. Nia exhaled a shuddering breath, her tears streaking her face, but her grip on the folder unyielding. She turned to him and said, "Then teach me everything. Tell me what they fear. Tell me why my mother's death shakes them so that they would chain her, even in death." Darius looked at her in the dim light of the garage, his face lined with shadows and truth, and said, "Because your mother was the witness to the crime that built their empire, and because the moment her name is spoken in the light, everything they own collapses around them. And if you are willing to speak that name, then you must be willing to face the storm it brings." Nia's heart thundered, but she did not flinch. She lifted the photo of her mother. The frame cracked, the smile unbroken, and whispered, "Then let the storm come, because I will not let them steal her voice again." And Darius saw in her eyes the same fire he once saw in her mother's, and he knew the fight was only beginning. The garage air felt stale and close around them, the silence broken only by the ticking engine cooling down and the faint hum of fluorescent lights above. Nia sat with the folder still clutched to her chest, her fingers aching from holding it so tight, but she would not loosen her grip, because it felt like more than paper. It felt like her mother's voice pressed into pages that should have never been hidden. Darius leaned against the car door, his eyes fixed on the concrete wall, as if seeing through it, to the storm gathering outside. His voice was quiet but heavy. When he finally spoke, "They know we escaped with the records. They will come after you now, as much as they come after me, and you must understand that once your mother's truth is uncovered, it will not only bring justice, it will also bring war." Nia turned to him, her eyes rimmed Red but fierce, she said, "I do not care if they come for me. I have already lost everything. What else can they take from me?" But her voice cracked at the end, because deep inside, she knew grief was one thing, but fear was another, and the idea of men in suits with guns chasing her through shadows made her blood turn cold. The driver interrupted softly, "Sir, we cannot stay here long. There are eyes everywhere in this city. If the board sent their people, then they already know which of your safe houses are still in use." Darius nodded grimly and said, "Then, we do not hide, we strike before they bury us." He turned to Nia and added, "But first you must see something your mother asked me to protect until this day came." He guided her through a steel door at the far end of the garage, the driver staying behind to monitor the cameras inside. Was a stairwell descending deep beneath the ground, each step colder and darker, until they reached a vault door with a keypad. Darius entered the code with steady fingers, and the locks unsealed one by one until the heavy door groaned open. Inside was not gold or money, but shelves of locked boxes and drawers stacked with files. Nia looked around, her heart pounding. "This is where you keep the secrets of your empire," she whispered, and Darius replied, "This is where I keep the truths that could destroy it, and your mother's truth is among them." He opened a drawer and withdrew a sealed envelope, marked only with the initials LGHE, handed it to her, his expression unreadable. Nia tore it open with shaking hands. Inside was a letter written in her mother's handwriting, the same loops and curls she had seen on grocery lists, taped to the fridge. Her eyes blurred as she read, "My dearest Nia, if you are holding this, then I am gone, and you have stepped into a world I prayed you would never see. I kept silence to protect you, but silence has its end. If you are here, then Darius is with you, and he owes you the truth. He owes you more than he can repay." Nia pressed the page to her lips, fighting sobs, her mother's words alive on the paper, her voice reaching across death. She whispered, "Why did you not tell me? Mama, why did you leave me blind in a world full of wolves?" Darius lowered his head as though ashamed and said, "Because she believed keeping you in the light was safer than letting you into the dark. But the dark has found you anyway." He then pulled another folder from the vault and spread photographs across the table, black and white images, grainy but clear enough to show men in meetings, contracts signed with blood in the margins. One image showed Lila, her mother, standing at the edge of a room holding a tray of coffee cups, her eyes caught by the flash of the camera. Though she had not known it was aimed at her, Darius tapped that photo and said she was there the night it happened. "She saw the exchange that made them powerful, and she saved me. When the shooting started, they could never allow her name to Stared at the picture, her heart twisting. That was her mother, silent in the background of history, unseen and unthanked, yet carrying the heaviest truth. She said, "So they think by keeping her body from me, they can keep her silent forever." And Darius answered, "Yes, but they underestimated you. They thought grief would break you instead. It gave you fire." Suddenly, the driver's voice crackled through an intercom. "They are here, sir. Black SUVs just pulled up outside, too many for me to hold off alone." Darius shut the vault quickly, the lock slamming back into place. He turned to Nia and said, "It is time to choose. Do you want to run and hide, or do you want to fight? And if you fight, then you must be ready for blood and betrayal." She swallowed hard, fear twisting with rage, and whispered, "I will fight for Hertha." Moment they stepped back into the garage, the echo of boots filled the space, shadows moving between pillars, men in dark suits spreading like wolves. Darius pulled Nia behind him, his own body shielding hers. The driver crouched by the car, a weapon drawn, though his hands trembled under the weight of what was coming. One of the suited men called out, "Mr. Cole, you have something that does not belong to you. Hand it over, and this can end quietly." Darius's voice cut through the air like steel. "She does not belong to you, and neither does her mother's truth. If you want it, then come take it, but you will not bury her again." The men advanced and chaos erupted, the sound of gunfire ricocheting off concrete, the driver firing back, the garage filling with smoke and sparks. Nia crouched low, clutching the folder and picture against her chest, her heart screaming that she should run, but her legs frozen because running meant leaving. Her mother's truth behind. Darius grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the service elevator, shouting above the din, "We cannot win this fight here. We need to move." The driver, covering them with desperate bursts of fire as they darted through the haze, bullets sparking around them. Nia felt her chest burn with terror, yet her grip never loosened on the folder, because losing it meant losing her mother twice. They burst into the elevator, the doors closing with a metallic groan as shouts echoed behind them, the driver slamming the emergency switch to cut the circuits, buying them precious seconds. The lift climbed slowly, each second an eternity. Nia's breath ragged, she turned to Darius and said, "Why do they fear this truth so much? What is in these pages that can tear them apart?" And his eyes met hers, grim and blazing. "Because it is not only money, not only crime, it is the names of those who pretend to lead. This city, it is the proof that their power was bought with blood. And if it comes out, everything burns." The doors opened to the rooftop, the night air rushing around them, the city sprawling like a sea of lights. Helicopters thudding in the distance, as though the world itself was closing in. Nia stepped into the wind, her hair whipping around her face, and raised the photo high, as though daring the night to take notice. She shouted into the darkness, "They will not erase you, Mama. They will not steal your name again." Her cry carried across the rooftops, raw and unbroken. Darius stood beside her, his coat whipping in the wind, and he said, "Then we make sure the world hears it before they silence us." And he pulled out a small device from his pocket, a transmitter coded to release files directly to every major news outlet in the city. He pressed it into Nia's hand and said, "The choice is yours. Do you press it now and ignite the fire, or do you wait and plan to survive?" Nia stared at the device, the weight of her mother's memory heavy in her arms. The city below glittered, indifferent and hostile. Her heart thundered with grief, rage and love. She looked at the cracked frame of the photo, then at Darius, then at the endless night, and whispered, "Mama, guide me, because the storm is here and I must choose how to unleash." The wind roared across the rooftop, the night sky heavy with storm clouds and the blades of distant helicopters pulsing like war drums. Nia gripped the small transmitter in one hand, the cracked frame of her mother's photo in the other, her knuckles white, her breath ragged, her heart torn between the fire of rage and the chill of fear. Darius stood beside her, his coat whipping in the wind, his eyes hard, but there was something in them, to a glimmer of a man who had once been saved and was now bound to repay the debt below them. The city stretched endless and glittering, unaware that a storm was about to break that could shatter the foundations of its towers. Men in suits were already swarming the building, their shouts echoing faintly up the stairwell, rifles clattering against railings. The driver stood at the door to the rooftop, weapon raised, jaw clenched, as he prepared to buy them time with his life, if he had. Tonia looked at the transmitter again, and her chest clenched. It was such a small thing, barely heavier than a deck of cards, yet it carried within it the power to turn her mother's hidden truth into fire. She thought of her mother's hands braiding her hair, the hum of a soft tune in the kitchen, the quiet strength in her eyes even when bills piled on the table. She whispered, "Mama, tell me what to do. Mama, tell me how to carry your voice." Darius stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "You must understand, the moment you press that button, there is no going back. The files will flood into every outlet, every network, and the men who fear this truth will stop at nothing. Not tomorrow, not next year. They will come for you with everything they have. Are you prepared to live hunted, or do you want to wait and fight smarter?" She turned to him, her eyes blazing through tears, and said, "They already hunted my mother. They already silenced her. I will not live in fear. I will not hide." The stairwell door burst open, men in black suits pouring out weapons, gleaming under floodlights. The driver fired a desperate volley, forcing them back, sparks flying, concrete chipping as bullets tore into the rooftop, the sound deafening. Nia crouched, instinctively shielding the folder and the photo, as if her body itself could shield her mother's truth. Darius grabbed her arm, pulling her toward cover behind an air duct, shouting above the chaos, "If you want to press it, do it now before they take it from you." Her thumb hovered over the button, her breath catching. Time seemed to slow, her ears ringing with the sound of gunfire and shouts, her heart echoing her mother's name. Then she pressed down, the click echoing louder in her chest than the gunfire. The device vibrated, a tiny green light flashing, and Nia felt the air shift, as if the world itself knew something irreversible had just been set in motion. Miles away, servers lit up, inboxes overflowed, red banners began flashing across newsrooms, and anchors looked up in shock as files downloaded onto their systems. Darius's board members' phones would already be buzzing, their secrets no longer locked in dusty vaults, but spilling into the hungry eyes of the world. The men on the rooftop froze for a split second, as though realizing too late that the thing they feared had just happened. Then rage broke over them like a wave, and they advanced, firing recklessly. The driver cried out as a bullet caught his arm, but he kept firing, his teeth clenched, blood dripping down his sleeve. Darius pulled Nia to her feet and shouted, "We move now, because the fire is lit, and they cannot put it out, but they can still put you down." They dashed across the rooftop, bullets sparking at their heels. Nia's lungs burning every step, a battle between terror and determination. She clutched the photo tighter, whispering, "Mama, we did it. Mama, your voice is free." Darius kicked open a service ladder leading to the next building down the driver, covering them as they scrambled across rain-slicked metal rungs, the city roaring below. They reached the lower rooftop. Sirens wailed in the distance, police lights flashing blue and red, reflecting off wet glass, but Darius cursed under his breath. "These are not real police. They are already in the pockets of the men we fight. If they find us now, they will not arrest us. They will disappear us." We keep moving. Nia's legs shook, but she forced them forward, because grief had already broken her once. She would not let fear break her again. They ducked into a stairwell, racing downward, the sound of pursuit, never far behind. Her mind spun with images of her mother's smile, her laughter, her silence now shattered by the voice of truth spreading through the city. She whispered, "You are heard, Mama. The whole world will know." They emerged into a dark alley, rain falling in sheets, the driver limping but still steady as he scanned for threats. A car screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley, headlights blinding for a moment. Then Darius's driver recognized it and waved them forward, a hidden backup vehicle prepared for emergencies. They piled in, the engine roaring as they sped away, tires splashing through rivers of rain. Nia sat shaking in the back seat, still gripping the photograph as if it were fused to her skin. Darius looked at her with something like awe. He said, "You did what I never had the courage to do. You pressed the button. You let the fire loose. You are stronger than you know. But this is only the beginning, because men like them do not surrender. They strike back harder." Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, hands trembling. It was flooded with notifications, headlines exploding across every feed, secret deals, exposed names of powerful men tied to blood and betrayal. The world was watching, and Nia knew there was no turning back. The faces of the untouchable were now burning under the light of her mother's truth. She whispered, "They cannot bury her anymore." But even as the city reeled and the powerful scrambled, a shadow of dread fell over her, because she could see in Darius's eyes that he knew the retaliation would be brutal. His jaw tightened as he said, "We must prepare, because what comes next will not just be about your mother or me. It will be about survival and revenge. They will want to erase you before your voice grows louder." Car raced toward another safe house, rain blurring the windshield, sirens echoing closer. Nia leaned back, her head against the seat, tears sliding silently down her face. Not of despair, but of release. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt as though Lila was alive again, her story no longer silent, her name no longer hidden. Yet the storm was only beginning, and as the night closed around them, Nia whispered into the dark, "I am ready, Mama. I am ready for the war." They bring. The night bled into dawn as the city stirred with headlines blazing across every screen, truths too long buried. Now, screaming in capital letters. Nia watched through the tinted window of the safe house as news anchors' lips moved silently behind glass, the words scrolling fast beneath them, names of men once untouchable, now tangled with crime, betrayal, and blood. She clutched the cracked frame of her mother's photo close, her heart trembling between triumph and dread, because freedom carried a cost, and she could feel it closing in. Darius stood at the window, his shoulders rigid, his phone vibrating every few minutes with messages from allies, enemies, and traitors. His empire was unraveling thread by thread, yet his expression was not defeat, but calculation, as though he had prepared for this storm all his life. He turned to Nia, his voice steady. "But lo, they will come harder now. They will not let this stand. You expose them, but they will paint you as liar, criminal, mad child. They will try to bury you with the same shovel they buried your mother. Are you strong enough to face them?" They lifted her head, eyes rimmed red, but blazing. She said, "I am my mother's daughter." She cleaned halls no one noticed. She held truths no one thanked, and she still saved lives with nothing but courage. "If she could face their bullets, I can face their lies." Her voice cracked, but her resolve did not. Darius studied her a moment, then nodded with respect. He rarely gave anyone. The driver entered, his arm bandaged, but his face pale. He said, "Sir, the board has already convened. They are cutting ties with you, freezing accounts, calling in debts, but more than that, they are calling for her arrest." He gestured to Nia, his jaw tight. "There are warrants being forged as we speak. They want to brand her a thief who stole classified information from the hospital. Records." Darius cursed under his breath, fists clenching. "They will twist the story until the world believes it unless we get ahead of them." Nia felt a fresh wave of fear, but then her phone buzzed again. Thousands of messages pouring in, strangers sending Words of support, mothers, fathers, workers, all saying, "We hear you, we believe you." Her mother's name hashtagged across the globe, trending louder than any slander she looked at. Darius, tears streaking her cheeks, but her voice fierce. "They cannot bury me if the people lift me up." He gave a small, sharp smile, the kind that carries no joy but recognition of a battle fought on new ground. "Then we fight with light." He said, "Not in shadows we go public, not with files but with you, your face, your voice. Your mother's name, let them try to call you liar. When the world has already seen your truth." Naya's chest tightened. She had never imagined herself speaking to crowds, only whispering her grief to the night. But now the weight of silence was gone, and in its place was fire hours. Later they stood in front of cameras, the safe house disguised as a small studio, the lights hot on her skin. Darius beside her, silent as she spoke, her voice trembling at first, then growing steady. She told them her mother's name, her laughter, her life. She told them how the hospital tried to steal her goodbye, how the men in power tried to erase her story, how a single cry in the rain reached ears she never expected. And now the world held the truth, because silence was no longer an option. Millions watched screens across continents, listening to a girl with nothing left but courage. Her words, cutting sharper than any blade, because they were true reporters, replayed the files, the letters, the photographs, side by side with her testimony, and the cracks in the walls of power grew wider. Some board members resigned in panic. Others doubled down with threats, but the tide had shifted that night. The retaliation came, a convoy of dark cars descending on the safehouse, men in suits, spilling out like shadows. But this time they were not met by silence. The street outside, filled with people, ordinary citizens holding signs, chanting Leela Grant's name, voices echoing off the glass towers. The men hesitated. Because bullets cannot silence a crowd, and lies cannot drown a chant that grows louder with every echo. Nia stood at the window, watching her mother's name lifted into the air by strangers who had never known her but now carried her memory like a banner. Her tears streamed, but they were not only grief, they were release. She whispered, "Mama, you are not erased, you are everywhere." Darius watched to his jaw tight, his eyes shadowed. He said, "They will still come for me, but for you there is hope. The people have chosen." Youth driver burst in, "Urgent, sir. There is a helicopter waiting. We can get you both out." But Darius shook his head. "No, this is where I stay. This is my war. She must live for hers." He turned to Naya, his voice softer than she had ever heard. "If I do not survive, remember this. Your mother saved me once, and you saved me again tonight. Do not let their darkness swallow your light." She wanted to argue, but his gaze held hers steady, and she understood some debts can only be paid in sacrifice. The crowd outside swelled their chants, thunder rolling through the streets, the convoy engines revving, then hesitating, then pulling back, because even power bends when the people rise. The helicopter blades thundered above, urgency pulling them to leave, the driver urging her forward. Naya clutched the photograph tighter, her chest aching. She looked at Darius one last time and whispered, "Thank you for hearing me," and he gave the smallest nod, his eyes fierce. Then he turned toward the door, where shadows waited his steps. Steady, unafraid, Nia climbed into the helicopter, the city shrinking beneath her, the crowd still chanting her mother's name, banners waving, lights flashing across glass towers. The folder still clutched to her chest, but she knew now it was not just paper. It was a torch passed from her mother to her, from silence to voice, from hidden grief to unstoppable fire. She whispered into the roar of the blades, "Mama, they cannot bury you, they cannot bury me." And her tears burned, but they were tears of strength. As the horizon blazed with the first light of morning, the storm behind her and the fire ahead, Naya felt the weight of her mother's love like armor, the truth unleashed. Like thunder, she knew battles remained, but the war of silence was over. Her voice would not fade, her mother's name would not be erased. She closed her eyes, whispered a prayer, and opened them to the dawn, because the story was finished, the silence broken, the lesson carved into her heart. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find who you really are. And Nia Grant was no longer just a grieving daughter. She was her mother's voice, her mother's fight, her mother's justice alive in the world. At last the end